Oh, excuse me, Richard. That makes me so angry. Because he has not left the stage. That's absolute bloody rubbish.
Elizabeth Taylor was known for her beauty, talent, and unforgettable screen presence. Over her long career, she starred alongside some of Hollywood's most famous leading men. But there was one actor she swore she would never work with again. The reasons weren't just about professional differences. They were personal, emotional, and left a lasting scar on her Hollywood journey. In the glittering expanse of Hollywood's golden age, where constellations of stars burned brightly, few luminaries shone with the intensity and enduring power of Elizabeth Taylor. Her name itself evokes a sense of glamour, of breathtaking beauty, and of a talent that, at its peak, was nothing short of formidable. Throughout her long and storied career, Taylor shared the screen with a veritable who's who of Hollywood's leading men. She forged deep and lasting friendships with some, like the sensitive and soulful Montgomery Clift and the kind-hearted giant Rock Hudson. Her on-screen and off-screen passion with Richard Burton became the stuff of legend, a fiery and tumultuous love affair that captivated the world. She held her own opposite the likes of the effortlessly charming Paul Newman, creating cinematic magic that has stood the test of time. Yet, amidst this galaxy of celebrated collaborations, there exists a singular, enigmatic entry. A partnership with an actor of immense talent and equal notoriety, an experience so profound and, by many accounts, so deeply unsettling, that it is widely believed Elizabeth Taylor would never again share the screen with him. That leading man was Marlon Brando. The film that brought these two titans together was John Huston's 1967 Southern Gothic melodrama Reflections in a Golden Eye. A dark, atmospheric, and deeply controversial exploration of repressed sexuality, obsession, and emotional decay on a peacetime military base, the film was a stark departure from the more conventional Hollywood fare of the era. It was a challenging piece of material, one that would push its actors to the very brink of their emotional reserves. And it was on this intense and claustrophobic set that the worlds of Elizabeth Taylor and Marlon Brando would collide. A collision of two vastly different approaches to life, to art, and to the very craft of acting. To fully understand why this collaboration was a one-time affair, we must delve into the personalities of these two iconic figures, the charged atmosphere of the film's production, and the stark contrast between this working relationship and the others that defined Elizabeth Taylor's career. This is not a simple story of a petty on-set squabble. It is a complex tapestry woven from threads of artistic integrity, personal loyalty, and the fundamental irreconcilable differences between two of the 20th century's greatest screen legends. Our story begins not on the sun-drenched lots of Hollywood, but in the hallowed halls of a small schoolhouse on the Metro-Goldwyn-Mayer backlot. It was here, in the carefully controlled environment of the studio system, that a young Elizabeth Taylor and a teenage Marlon Brando first crossed paths. They were just two of the many promising young talents being groomed for stardom, their futures still unwritten. Decades later, Taylor would recall this early acquaintance, noting that they had known each other since they were children. This shared history, however, did not translate into an easy camaraderie on the set of Reflections in a Golden Eye. By the time the film went into production in 1966, Elizabeth Taylor was, without question, the biggest movie star in the world. She was a two-time Academy Award winner, a fashion icon, and a woman whose every move was breathlessly documented by the press. She was also a consummate professional, a product of the old studio system who understood the importance of hitting her marks, knowing her lines, and delivering a performance that served the story. She had grown up in front of the camera, and her approach to acting, while deeply felt and emotionally resonant, was rooted in a tradition of discipline and control. Marlon Brando, on the other hand, was the very embodiment of a new, more rebellious school of acting. A devoted student of Stella Adler and a practitioner of what would become known as the method, Brando had revolutionized the art of screen acting with his raw, instinctual, and often unpredictable performances. He was a genius, of that there was no doubt, but he was also a notoriously difficult and enigmatic figure. He disdained the artifice of Hollywood, viewing the studio system with a mixture of contempt and amusement. He was known for his on-set pranks, his mumbling delivery, and his steadfast refusal to learn his lines, preferring to have them written on cue cards and placed strategically around the set. This fundamental difference in their training and artistic philosophies would prove to be a significant source of tension during the filming of Reflections in a Golden Eye. Taylor, the seasoned professional, was accustomed to a certain level of preparedness and collaboration from her co-stars. Brando, the iconoclastic artist, was a force of nature, a whirlwind of creative chaos that could be both thrilling and maddening to work with. But to truly grasp the complexities of their working relationship, we must first understand how Elizabeth Taylor came to be involved in the project at all. Her decision to star in Reflections in a Golden Eye was not born of a burning desire to work with Marlon Brando. Rather, it was an act of profound loyalty and love for another actor, a man who held a special place in her heart, Montgomery Clift. Elizabeth Taylor and Montgomery Clift shared a bond that transcended the typical Hollywood friendship. They had first met on the set of A Place in the Sun in 1951, and from that moment on, they were inseparable. Taylor, with her fierce and protective nature, became Clift's confidant, his champion, and, on one fateful night, his savior. In 1956, while leaving a dinner party at Taylor's home, Clift was involved in a horrific car accident that left his face, once a thing of delicate, almost ethereal beauty, shattered. Taylor, arriving at the scene before the paramedics, crawled into the wreckage and with her bare hands pulled 2 of his teeth from the back of his throat, preventing him from choking to death. In the aftermath of the accident, as Clift struggled with addiction and the emotional and physical scars of his ordeal, Taylor remained a steadfast presence in his life. She fought for him, using her considerable star power to ensure that he continued to get work, even when his increasingly erratic behavior and fragile health made him a risky proposition for studios. When the role of Major Weldon Penderton in Reflections in a Golden Eye was being cast, Taylor agreed to play the part of his tempestuous wife, Leonora, on one condition, that Montgomery Clift be cast opposite her. To understand why Brando's performance was both a critical triumph and a potential source of friction for a co-star like Elizabeth Taylor, we need to look beyond the surface tics, the mumbling, the accent, the faraway stares, and delve into the very philosophy that fueled him. Brando was the high priest of American method acting, a discipline derived from the teachings of the Russian master Konstantin Stanislavski. But Brando's method, filtered through his teacher Stella Adler, was a uniquely personal and volatile concoction. At its core was the principle of emotional recall, the idea that an actor must plumb the depths of their own past experiences, their own traumas and joys, to produce a truthful performance. For Brando, a scene about humiliation was not about pretending, it was about dredging up a memory of his own humiliation, perhaps at the hands of his abusive father, and reliving that feeling in front of the camera. This made his performances incredibly authentic, but it also made the actor an exposed nerve. It required him to seal himself off in a protective bubble of his own psychology, to live inside the character's head, often at the expense of his connection to the outside world, including his scene partners. Elizabeth Taylor's approach was almost the polar opposite. Having grown up in the highly technical world of the MGM studio system, she possessed what many consider an even more remarkable skill: the ability to generate powerful, convincing emotions through imagination and technique without having to psychologically self-destruct. She could weep with startling authenticity, not because she was thinking about a dead pet or a past heartbreak, but because the script and the character demanded tears, and she was a master of her instrument. She could access those emotions, channel them for the camera, and then, crucially, let them go. For Taylor, acting was a powerful act of empathy and imagination, but it was still an act. Now place these two opposing philosophies in a room together. Taylor, prepared and professional, looks into her co-star's eyes for the connection that fuels a scene. But Brando's eyes might be looking slightly past her, focused on a cue card. Not out of disrespect, but as a deliberate technique to keep his mind from settling into a comfortable, untrue rhythm. Taylor delivers a line with the full force of her emotional power, expecting a return of energy. What she might get back from Brando is a hesitant, mumbled, and entirely unexpected response. Because he is in the process of discovering the moment, not reenacting it. For a method purist like Brando, this is the pinnacle of the art. For a classically trained professional like Taylor, it can feel like working in a void. It can feel like your partner isn't holding up their end of the bargain, that they are engaged in a private artistic monologue instead of a collaborative dialogue. This wasn't just a difference in style. It was a fundamental disagreement on the very nature of what it means to act with someone. It was a testament to her loyalty, a final desperate attempt to help her troubled friend. But it was a dream that would never be realized. On July 22, 1966, just before filming was set to begin, Montgomery Clift died of a heart attack at the age of 45. His death was a devastating blow to Elizabeth Taylor. The project, which she had undertaken as a life raft for her friend, now became a somber and emotionally fraught obligation. The role of Major Penderton, which had been so closely intertwined with her hopes for Clift's recovery, was now vacant. The part was offered to Richard Burton, Taylor's then husband, and to Lee Marvin, both of whom turned it down. Ultimately, it was Marlon Brando who stepped into the role, bringing with him a style of acting and a personal ethos that could not have been more different from that of the man he was replacing. The set of Reflections in a Golden Eye, already steeped in the gothic gloom of Carson McCullers' novel, was now imbued with an air of melancholy and a palpable sense of what might have been. For Elizabeth Taylor, every scene, every line of dialogue was a reminder of the friend she had lost. And into this emotionally charged environment walked Marlon Brando, an actor whose approach to his craft was, for Taylor, a world away from the shared sensibilities and deep, intuitive connection she had enjoyed with Montgomery Clift. John Huston, the legendary director at the helm of the film, was a master of creating atmospheric and psychologically complex cinema. He was known for his literary adaptations, his love of flawed, larger-than-life characters, and his ability to draw powerful performances from his actors. With Reflections in a Golden Eye, Huston sought to create a film that was as unsettling and claustrophobic as the novel upon which it was based. He made the controversial decision to shoot the film in a desaturated, golden-hued color palette, a visual representation of the emotional and sexual repression that hangs heavy over the characters. To truly appreciate the volatile chemistry on the set of Reflections in a Golden Eye, one must also consider the third powerful figure in the creative triangle, the director, John Huston. Huston was no mere traffic cop of actors, he was a legend in his own right, a cinematic giant carved from the same granite as Ernest Hemingway. He was a man's man, a boxer, a painter, a soldier, a big game hunter, who made films that were muscular, intelligent, and often deeply cynical about the human condition. He had wrangled Humphrey Bogart in the sweltering jungle for The African Queen, and directed his own father to an Oscar in The Treasure of the Sierra Madre. He was not a man who was easily intimidated, yet the challenge of directing Elizabeth Taylor and Marlon Brando simultaneously was unique. It was like trying to harness two completely different forms of energy. In his autobiography, An Open Book, Huston offered a fascinating glimpse into his perception of his two stars. He saw Taylor as a force of nature, an actress of immense, almost primal emotional intelligence. He described her as someone who could simply be the character, whose talent was so innate that it appeared effortless. She would arrive on set, hit her marks, and deliver a torrent of raw, genuine emotion, and then when the cameras stopped rolling, she could shed the character's skin and return to being Elizabeth. He admired this professionalism, seeing it as the mark of a true movie star who understood the mechanics of the craft without sacrificing its soul. She was, in his eyes, pure instinct. Brando, however, was a different animal altogether. Huston saw him as a creature of immense intellect, an actor who processed everything through a filter of intense psychological analysis. He wrote that Brando wasn't content just to be. He had to understand. He was forever probing his own and other people's actions, trying to find the why behind them. This cerebral approach, Huston observed, could sometimes lead to a kind of paralysis. Where Taylor was a lightning strike of emotion, Brando was a complex weather system, beautiful to behold but impossible to predict. Huston respected Brando's genius but was often bemused by his methods. He recognized that the line reading from cue cards and the endless questioning were not signs of laziness, but part of Brando's elaborate process to avoid the staleness of a rehearsed performance. The director thus found himself in the position of a mediator between instinct and intellect. He had to create a space where Taylor's direct, from-the-gut power could coexist with Brando's cerebral, deconstructionist approach. It was a delicate balancing act. Huston noted that Brando often engaged in a kind of game-playing on set, subtle manipulations designed to provoke a genuine reaction from his co-stars. But Taylor, a veteran of countless film sets since childhood, was not one to be easily manipulated. She was there to do a job that was now painfully shadowed by grief. She expected her scene partner to be present, to connect, to engage in the shared reality of the story. Brando, in his quest for his own internal truth, was often in a different reality altogether. Huston's task was to somehow point their formidable talents in the same direction. But even for a master like him, bridging the philosophical chasm that separated his two leads was perhaps the most challenging directorial assignment of his career. The story itself is a powder keg of simmering passions and forbidden desires. Major Weldon Penderton, a repressed homosexual, finds himself increasingly obsessed with a young, enigmatic private, L.G. Williams, played by a then unknown Robert Forster. Penderton's wife, Leonora, a vivacious and sensual woman trapped in a loveless marriage, engages in a brazen affair with his colleague, Lieutenant Colonel Morris Langdon. The Langdons' own marriage is a study in quiet desperation, with Allison Langdon, played by the brilliant Julie Harris, retreating into a world of emotional fragility and quiet madness after the death of her child. Into this hothouse of emotional turmoil, Marlon Brando threw himself with a commitment that was both admirable and, at times, alienating. He gained weight for the role, creating a soft, almost doughy physicality for the once proud military man. He adopted a clipped, effeminate Southern accent, a vocal choice that walked a fine line between characterization and caricature. He fully inhabited the tormented psyche of Major Penderton, a man at war with his own nature, a man for whom the carefully constructed facade of masculinity is beginning to crumble. For many critics, Brando's performance was a tour de force, a brave and unflinching portrayal of a man in the throes of a profound and painful self-discovery. Roger Ebert, in his 1967 review, wrote that Brando had regained the peak of his magnificent talent, praising a scene in which the actor slowly breaks down and cries, his face screwing up in misery. Julie Harris, a fellow method actor, recalled that Brando took the role very seriously, almost as if he was exploring his own sexuality, his own inner torment. But for Elizabeth Taylor, Brando's deeply internalized and often improvisational approach was a source of frustration. She was an actress who thrived on connection, on the give and take of a shared scene. With Montgomery Clift, she had shared an almost telepathic understanding. There was a fiery, combative energy, a passion that, while often tumultuous, was always rooted in a deep and abiding connection. With Brando, however, there was a sense of distance, of an actor so deeply immersed in his own process that he became an island, a solitary figure in a sea of his own making. This is not to say that Taylor was not a generous actor. On the contrary, she was known for her ability to connect with her co-stars to create a sense of intimacy and trust that allowed for moments of genuine emotional truth. But Brando's method, with its emphasis on internal monologue and its disregard for the more traditional aspects of a shared performance, created a chasm between them. The on-set tension was not limited to their differing acting styles. The subject matter of the film itself was emotionally draining. The themes of sexual repression, infidelity, and violence were a far cry from the romantic comedies and historical epics that had defined much of Taylor's earlier career. And while she had recently proven her dramatic mettle with her Oscar-winning turn in Who's Afraid of Virginia Woolf, a film that also explored the dark and messy terrain of a troubled marriage, the experience of making Reflections in a Golden Eye was, by all accounts, a more somber and unsettling affair. The atmosphere on set was further compounded by Brando's infamous on-set behavior. While there are no documented accounts of major blow-ups or overt hostility between the two stars, Brando's penchant for pranks and his general air of insouciance could be grating to those who did not share his particular sense of humor. He was a master of throwing his fellow actors off balance, a technique that he believed brought a greater sense of realism to their performances. But for an actress like Taylor, who was already grappling with the emotional weight of the material and the personal tragedy of Clift's death, Brando's antics may have felt less like a creative choice and more like a lack of respect for the craft and for his fellow performers. There is a now infamous story, though its veracity is difficult to confirm, that speaks to the chasm between their sensibilities. According to some reports, Brando, when asked why he had never been romantically involved with Taylor, despite their shared history and undeniable on-screen chemistry, callously remarked that her posterior was too small for his tastes. Whether or not this comment was ever actually uttered, the very existence of such a rumor speaks to a perception of Brando as a man who could be both charming and cruel, a man for whom the feelings of others were often a secondary consideration to his own whims and desires. This is in stark contrast to the deep and abiding friendships that Elizabeth Taylor cultivated with her other leading men. Her relationship with Rock Hudson, her co-star in the 1956 epic Giant, was one of genuine affection and mutual respect. Taylor was one of the few people in Hollywood who knew of Hudson's homosexuality, a secret he guarded for fear of losing his career. She protected him, offering him a safe space in a world that was often cruel and unforgiving. Their friendship endured for decades, and in the final heartbreaking days of Hudson's life, as he battled AIDS, Taylor became a fierce and tireless advocate for a cause that was still shrouded in fear and ignorance. Her bond with Montgomery Clift, as we have seen, was one of profound and unwavering loyalty. She was his protector, his confidant, and his fiercest defender. She fought for him, she saved his life, and she mourned his death with a grief that was both deep and abiding. And then, of course, there was Richard Burton. Theirs was a love story for the ages, a passionate, tumultuous, and utterly captivating affair that played out on the world stage. They were the battling Burtons, a couple whose fiery arguments were as legendary as their extravagant gifts and their undeniable love for one another. They made 11 films together, and while their on-set dynamic was often as volatile as their private life, there was always a sense of a shared journey, of two souls locked in a dance of love and art. Against this backdrop of deep friendships and passionate collaborations, the experience of working with Marlon Brando on Reflections in a Golden Eye stands out as a stark and solitary anomaly. It was a professional engagement, not a meeting of kindred spirits. It was a collision of two vastly different worlds, of two artists who, for all their shared talent, were fundamentally out of sync. While there is no single definitive quote from Elizabeth Taylor stating that she would never work with Marlon Brando again, the evidence is writ large in the landscape of her career. In the years that followed Reflections in a Golden Eye, she would go on to make films with a wide array of actors, but Brando's name would never again appear on a call sheet alongside hers. Perhaps the experience was simply too emotionally taxing. The combination of the film's dark subject matter, the lingering grief over the loss of Montgomery Clift, and the challenging on-set dynamic with Brando may have created an experience that she had no desire to repeat. Perhaps it was a matter of artistic incompatibility. Taylor, for all her glamour and star power, was an actress who valued collaboration, who sought to build a connection with her scene partners. Brando, in his quest for a raw and unvarnished truth, often seemed to be performing in a vacuum, a world of his own creation. This fundamental difference in their approach to the craft may have made the prospect of a future collaboration untenable.
Or perhaps in the end it was a matter of personal chemistry.
Elizabeth Taylor was a woman who lived her life with an open heart. She loved fiercely, she befriended deeply, and she brought that same passion and emotional honesty to her work. In Marlon Brando, she may have encountered a sensibility that was simply too remote, too enigmatic, too closed off to the kind of connection that she both craved and cultivated. The story of why Elizabeth Taylor never worked with Marlon Brando again is not a simple one. It is a story with no easy answers, no smoking gun, no single, definitive moment of conflict. It is instead a story that can be read between the lines, in the silences and the unspoken tensions of a difficult and emotionally charged film set. It is a story about two titans of the silver screen, two artists who, for one brief and intense period, shared a creative space, only to find that their worlds, their methods, and their very souls were, in the end, irreconcilable. And so, they went their separate ways. Their single, shared credit on Reflections in a Golden Eye, a testament to a collaboration that was as fascinating and as ultimately unrepeatable as the film itself. Elizabeth Taylor would continue to grace the screen for many years to come, her legacy as one of Hollywood's greatest stars secure. But she would do so without ever again sharing the frame with the enigmatic, the brilliant, the maddeningly complex force of nature that was Marlon Brando. And in that silent refusal, in that unspoken decision, lies a story as compelling and as full of unspoken drama as any that has ever been committed to celluloid. For someone like Elizabeth Taylor, who handled fame and controversy with grace, walking away from a co-star wasn't a decision she made lightly. Her story reveals the challenges actors face behind the scenes and how sometimes the hardest roles aren't the ones played on camera, but the ones lived off-screen.